I'm gonna be making the case that Romancing Saga 2 might be the best JRPG that was released in 2025, which I know is insane, but it's definitely the best JRPG that is released on the Nintendo Switch too. Not that that's a really high bar, considering there's only like one other one I can think of, and that's really just sort of a remaster of a really great game. One of my favorite games, Suikoden 1 and 2. It's phenomenal. Although there are so many things that mark against that, considering the fact that if you bought the Switch 1 version, you still have to buy the Switch 2 version at full price, which is ridiculous. Not to mention the fact that this doesn't feel like a new game, as where Romancing Saga 2 feels like a completely new game, and it probably should, considering it was a remake. So let's talk about why Romancing Saga 2 is one of my favorite shadow drops so far in 2025, and a game that really surprised me, and I am so glad I picked it up. But before we get into that, please hit the like and subscribe button, help this channel grow. You know the whole bit, yada yada, but it seriously does help, and so I really appreciate each and every one of you who actually does do that. Anyway, so Romancing Saga 2 has an incredibly unique storyline, one that isn't done by many other games, because for one, you don't just have one main character, you have many. You see, think of Romancing Saga 2 more like the Eras tour, like Taylor Swift. You go through different eras, and that's kind of how this game feels, because you don't really play as one main character, you play as every emperor of this kingdom, although you do inherit a lot of your predecessor's abilities, so all the work that you did with the last emperor doesn't feel like a waste. And if I'm being honest, this really didn't seem like something I would be into, considering I sort of get attached to characters. Like, I like playing as certain characters, and so to basically watch time bury them, I didn't really think I would enjoy that. But you don't really spend that much time with the characters. Each chapter, or era, if you will, really turns into about 3 to 6 hours maybe. There's some that peak a little bit higher, but really, you're just getting to know the lay of the land and how time has changed everything, which I do think is something that they could have worked on a little bit, and I will touch on that here in a second. But I also want to talk about the fact that there is sort of an overarching story with this immortal evil enemy that does sort of stalk you through the ages, but it doesn't really manifest that often. There are some areas that really strictly focus on like domestic issues that are going on, and you barely talk about like this evil entity, and in fact, I even kind of wondered if they were going to touch back upon it. But yeah, a couple things that I would change is like, so hundreds of years pass in between the time when you first start and the time when you actually put the game down. And it doesn't seem like that much changed in the landscape, as well as, especially while you're playing through the main story, you're kind of in the middle of it, no one ever really talks about the former emperors. And as those emperors, you did like some amazing things. Something where you would expect like there to be some shrines or something. And the way it works is basically after you've completed your main goal, they will be like 90 years later, 70 years later, and then you actually choose out of, I believe it's 6 different characters that you can choose to be your successor, and they all sort of feel the same after a while, like it's sort of the same characters recycled. They also don't actually touch how this other person inherited the crown, and I really wish that that's something they could have worked on. It would have been pretty easy, I think, like, instead of you choosing the actual successor, you could choose a partner of the emperor, and then, at the end, that's when they could say, oh, hey, this is the character that was randomly generated between these 2 characters, and this is the successor. I just think like that would have been a little bit cooler and make a little bit more sense, because for this, it's just, hey, I chose who was going to be the next emperor, but like really, that wouldn't make sense in the world. Like, oh, just some god chose them out of nowhere, and they were fully grown by the time they were chosen. Like, none of that really makes sense, but I'm not going to harp on it too much, because it is, while a huge part of the game, it also doesn't matter that much. But what does matter is the combat, because this is some of the best turn-based combat I've played in a while. You see, one interesting thing about it, for one, is there is permadeath in this game, and there's no levels. So when you play as a character, you form your team, there will be something called LP, and you only have like so many, like 10, 15, and once you've zeroed that out, that character is forever dead. You cannot bring them back. You can easily recruit a new team member, but the problem is you lose so much growth with that character that has now passed away. And what do I mean by that? I said there was no levels. Well, there's not specifically in the traditional sense of an RPG, but there are skill levels, and these all accumulate by how often you use those said moves. For instance, if you have a character who you equip a bow and arrow and a sword to, and with that character you just happen to use the bow and arrow a lot, well then their skill level in the bow and arrow is going to go way up while the sword will still stay the same. And while that skill level is going up, you also have the opportunity to learn new skills, which this is something I really enjoy. So you will get like this little thought bubble in the actual combat right next to your attack. And this lets you know, hey, you can learn a new move if you just keep using this move. And it's one of the funnest things about the game is because you're really over like 6 different characters while you're playing in each era. And so you're trying to level all of them up in each skill. And so you're trying to like kind of balance between like what's going to be effective as your attack, because enemies are weak to different attacks, just like in almost every other RPG, but they're also not always coincide with you learning new abilities. So there are sometimes when you choose the weaker attack, just so you can keep growing that particular skill and learning new moves. And by the way, just so you know, yes, skill level matters a lot. You can have one of your veteran characters and equip something new to them, and you'll be surprised how little damage they do with that weapon. That's a cool thing that I want to mention too, and something that is almost so traditional that it's not even funny, but it's a really cool aspect of this game is you can use magic with any combination of weapons. So like you can have somebody who's just like a beast with like a great shield and like a mace, but also be like one hell of a mage. It's a really cool concept, and it's not used in many games where there's like that much freedom. It's kind of cool. One of my final runs, or final eras if you will, my healer was also our tank, and it was like one of the best healers I've had in the entire game. Also, one last side note on combat: for those people who hate random encounters, don't worry, there is no random encounters in this game, so you don't have to worry about that. You can actually sneak up on enemies and do a surprise attack. I actually feel like this is a really good RPG for people who don't love turn-based combat because of some of the stuff that they've implemented. So I'm kind of shoving in performance, graphics, audio, all of that all in one here, and it's really because I don't have much to say about the performance. It performed great. I had no issues at all, no lagging, no skipping, no crashing, no nothing. But it is also one of those games that doesn't really need to be at like the highest frame rate or anything, so didn't really feel like it was that important. And the same with controls, you know, it doesn't really matter how your character controls since it is a turn-based game. No, obviously, like if the controls were just complete bunk, yes, that would suck. Then no, they are very serviceable and everything felt really good playing it. Didn't have any issues with it, but again, also not like a huge component of the game. But with that being said, I do have to say that the graphics and the music were amazing in this game. I absolutely adored what Square Enix had done with this. This really just felt like a throwback to great Square Enix quality. Now, is it the best that Square Enix has ever done? No, but it is really solid. So for me, overall, I'm going to give this game a 9 out of 10. I really enjoyed it, and this is the type of game I want to see them make more of. But anyway, that's just my thoughts. Let me know what your thoughts are down below. Are you excited for this game? Is this a game you played before? Did you get it on the Switch 1? How does it play on the Switch 1, by the way, for anyone who does own that game? I'm just curious. Are you excited about any games coming out soon, or what games you playing? Let me know in that comment section down below. Anyway, love each and every one of you guys. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.